Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon Podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Pascucci, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ava Benjamin Shore, and back with us today is our Season 1 co-host, Oren Sofer. Today, we could not be more excited to have with us on the show Greig Fraser, ASC, ACS. Greig is known for his masterful work on films such as Zero Dark 30, Lion, Rogue One, Vice, The Batman, and both Dune films, the first of which won him an Academy Award. Since the beginning of the show, Greig has been a very aspirational guest, and we could not be more honored to get the chance to talk with him today. I know for myself and so many cinematographers, Greig's work has been a huge source of inspiration for what can be achieved through exceptional and nuanced visual storytelling. Greig, congratulations on the incredible work that you and your team pulled off on Dune Part 2, and welcome to the show.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting to you guys.
Thank you so much. So, Greig, your photography book Exposures really offers a fascinating glimpse behind the cinematography of Dune Part 2. And I was really struck by the scale and intricacy of some of the set builds. And I was curious, when lighting or making visual choices for a film like Dune Part 2, how do you approach instilling authenticity and perhaps even imperfection into the image? I heard that the VFX team on Dune, through your and Denny's guidance, sometimes could be purposefully imperfect to sort of enhance the feeling and authenticity of the worlds you're depicting. And I was curious just about your thoughts of kind of incorporating that rough edge when lighting on a stage to create the illusion of the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that's very pertinent and also always top of mind when I'm pre-lighting a set, because we have the ability on any film we do to kind of light perfectly. There are a series of rules that we can follow to light perfectly and light ideally. But there are times where it doesn't look the best when you do that. Like, it looks a little bit filmy or false or something when you try and do that. So very often we tried to make sure that we made mistakes. Those mistakes obviously needed to be smart mistakes. But also, yeah, like sometimes the best operating is when you miss something. If you pan and miss something, like that's more real. There was a sequence we did in Dune Part 2, which is a lot of it's done in motion capture. I won't mention the sequence because it's not necessarily relevant right now, but we motion captured a number of performers and I went in and lensed it. And if you watch back at the scene, it's bad operating. Like I've missed some of the best stuff, but actually it feels the best. So there is a massive distinction between what's technically correct and what feels the right thing for the shot or for the film.
It's beautiful.
That makes me think a lot about the, in Dune 2, there's like lighting on Florence Pugh when she's like in the paradise area. And there's these harsh cross edges. And then there's this like fill from the front, but it's very much not like when I saw it, I wasn't like, oh, that's lighting I see a lot. And it was like a big close up, And I think something that I'm curious about too is I've often thought like, oh, that's beautiful, but man, directors would get annoyed if I showed them that image, So like, how often are you talking with directors ahead of time about embracing those things? Obviously, maybe Denny, you are, but like across the board, is that something that you're trying to prep ahead of time? Like, hey, what do you think of like lighting that is imperfect?
It's a good question in that sense, because it's also how you frame it. Because you can't really say, hey, I want to light something imperfectly, because it's not necessarily a bad way to start the conversation. It's like saying, I want to shoot something soft, or I want to make it look soft. I don't think that's a good way to phrase it, because what we mean by that, knowing the language, is you want lenses that don't necessarily resolve scientifically at the very best way. You want the fall off to be good. You want so there's a certain language there that can help that conversation. And you're right, making sure that it's accepted ahead of time is important about imperfection. But also, I think it's choosing your directors. Well, I'm not going to say I chose Denis, because I 100% didn't choose Denis. He chose me. But it's important that you choose your director relationships well, because there are certain directors I know that if they called me to work with them and I looked at their body of work, I don't know if I'm necessarily the guy for them. Yep. Do you know what I mean? Yep. Mm-hmm. Because I might see what they've done and I might go, how do I relate to what you've done in the past? So thankfully, I haven't really had to have many of those conversations.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a natural selection that goes on with that point. I think that maybe, hopefully, I wouldn't like to think I don't have a style, but maybe if I do have a style, is that I don't want things looking perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe the directors that call me don't necessarily want perfect either. So maybe the conversation doesn't need to happen.
I sort of have a follow-up to that too. I remember there's like some anecdotes I've read in the past of like Harris Savides pushing images to a certain point, and then he's like, I took it too far, and then he has to do reshoots, obviously like shooting film. If you've strove in the past for imperfect images, do you ever frame something up and go, I got to start over from scratch. This is just too messy or something, you know?
I got to say, I don't know if I've ever been too messy, but I definitely have been too clean and too neat. I'm not going to tell you where it is. I'm not going to tell you the shots in the movies that I've done that are too clean and too neat because that's going to give the game away. But I definitely have watched back films that I've worked on, and even with my crew, I've said, "You see that scene? Yeah, I didn't nail it, not we. I fail alone, I succeed together." But like I fail on certain things if I was too nice. Like the softbox was too correct. Everything was done the right way. The diffusion was too thick. Whatever it was, the light was too frontal, it was too perfect. Like the eye light was too perfect. I don't know if I've ever gone too far, to be frank with you.
Yeah.
Like there are times where I've second guessed myself. I can tell you that when we're watching dailies on the car chase in the Batmobile, there were shots I'm going, I think I need to take out that piece of silicon and put in a slightly less screwed up piece of silicon. But I don't watch that sequence and think it's too much. I watch that sequence and go, that's really well conceived. But I will say this, in fairness, it has been edited. So they've probably edited out all the times that it got too extreme. Like, for example, in the bat chase, use that as an example because we've all seen it. There are times where the piece of silicon I had in front of the lens, if it gets hit by headlights, it's too much. It just looks like a crazy sort of hallucinogenic kind of drug after effect, you know? But then when the headlights aren't on it, when it's sort of moving past, or it's not revealed and it's getting lights from above, it felt perfect. There were times where you go, okay, well, obviously they're not going to use the part where it looks like a drug overdose, but it's going to look really great before the headlights come out.
Yeah.
So we are protected, I guess. I am protected by my directors and editors as well. So what you see on screen has obviously been through a very thorough vetting process, through a director who I have full confidence in, and through an editor he has or she has full confidence in. Yeah. There is that, thankfully. It allows me to be a little bit more bold with my choices and my craziness, you know?
Yeah, and for context, the silicone you're talking about, is that with the water droplets that you put on there?
Yeah, because I originally put water on the lens, but then the water keeps getting blown off by our spray deflector system.
Yeah.
So I need to find a way to keep the glass dirty. And so, yeah, I just got clear silicone from the hardware store.
Yeah.
Just made dollops. So we had a whole box of different dollops. And so if we knew that the shot was, okay, so as an example, if we knew that the shot, we were framed sort of center frame, Penguin's vehicles on the left, Batmobile's on the right, I may put the dollops on the left to cover the Penguin's vehicle and less on the right, so that when the headlights hit, and then we learned from that and said, oh, when the headlights hit on filter C, it was too much. So then we cleaned that off or put a new one on, filter D, which didn't have silicon on that. I mean, that's, that was a whole choice in itself, was the silicon kit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. This kind of leads me to something else we wanted to ask you about. It's kind of about your philosophical approach to cinematography, which like I often find is about unlocking technical and creative control for the cinematographer. Yet I find the biggest hindrance on control to the cinematographer to sometimes be not technological, but like interpersonal. And I'm wondering, is this something you've encountered a lot? And are there ways you've learned to like deal or cope with it?
I mean, you're talking about human relationships on set?
Yeah. And I guess kind of the background for that question is like, I think you've made so many decisions that I think are so interesting and daring, say like from using LED lighting or from using lenses that people might scoff at, which I think has opened up younger and up and coming DPs to go, oh, that is a choice I can make, But I sometimes feel like when it comes to maintaining creative control over the image, it's often about maybe battles or conversations with people who want to take control away from you. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how do you manage that? And maybe coming up on some of the smaller films you did before you had an Academy Award and a reputation, like how have you sort of like worked through those things?
Well, you're right. The tail end of that is correct. Obviously, the more lauded one gets or more little statues one gets, the more weight one has with their voice. And that is, if nothing else, is the benefit of some form of public success in that regard. But I think, as you just pointed out, there were choices that were made well before those, and everything is a step forward. Everything is progressive, and nothing happens just overnight. And there isn't just suddenly one day you're not, one day you are. Like, you're right, there are steps that get made in one's career. I mean, I have a very high conviction when I believe in something, and I hope that passion shows through. I hope that I am able to properly express my passion. I know that sometimes using the right words with the right motivation to the right people can help. Being Australian, I don't know if you know many Australians, but we tend to get a bit passionate and sometimes a little bit aggressive. Like, we are a bit kind of aggressive. You know, some nationalities are passive aggressive. Some are we tend to get a bit aggressive. And I've had the good fortune to work with people who I can't be aggressive with in terms of directors. I mean, like, I've learned so much from people like Jane Campion. Like, to stand next to Jane Campion on set as a young Australian male cinematographer with all of that went along with it in my previous period of the way that I was kind of dealing with life, it was a really interesting learning curve for me, because I kind of went, this is how I need to be better. I need to kind of express myself better. In order for myself to be heard by Jane, I need to make sure. I mean, I remember my first meeting with Jane. So I came into a meeting with Jane to do a short film with her, and I bought all my references, and I was like, okay, so there's this, I think about that. I was like a mile a minute and showing my references. I had all these great ideas. They were amazing ideas. And and she goes, no, I don't think so. She goes, I'm not sure. And I walked out of that meeting literally like going, I've just screwed this meeting out completely. She's never going to hire me because she hated all my ideas. But what I learned from that actually was that the approach to Jane was not through that process. It was a slow burn of exchange of ideas. It was more of the cup of tea theory. You know, there are some nationalities, some countries you go to where to get anything done, you know, India is the point. Like on 0 Dark 30, to get into anywhere in India or a location, you had to go and sit and have a cup of tea. We all want to get in as a crew because we want 10 locations to scout in a day, but you've got to sit there for half an hour and have a cup of tea. If you can play into the people that you're managing, dealing with, like if you can learn from them, because it's not all about how we deal with it, or me and you and you and you. Like, it's not how you guys deal with it or I deal with it. It's how the people we are dealing with deal with it. So I know that's not necessarily 100% answered the question, but I think if you know, the LED volume thing, like, yeah, that took a lot of politicking, a lot of meetings, a lot of descriptions, a lot of explanations about why it was going to be better for Rogue One, like why it was worth the $1 million+ investment or whatever that was going to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When sussing out that relationship with the director, Greg, what does that look like for you when you're working with somebody new? Have you like developed a process over the years of getting to know somebody? Because I'm sure other directors, I mean, Jane works that way. Jane is a cup of tea director. And then other directors maybe need more of a hand-holding kind of situation. You need to do a little more heavy lifting, a little bit more suggestive approach to how to create the visuals of the project. So like when you're in prep or when you're even deciding on what project to take and how to choose a director to work with, like what do you look for, I suppose, when you're making that decision?
I haven't had to, again, I would like to think that I make the decision, and I do, of course I do, 100% do, because it's up to me, ultimately, all of us, if we choose to do a project. But I've been fortunate enough to have been chosen by some very, very good people and some very exciting people on some very exciting projects. So let me be frank. I mean, I'm very lucky and I can't say anything otherwise. You know, the Rogue One story, I think, Noreen, you've heard this a million times, but what appealed to me about that, I wanted to meet Gareth, but I didn't necessarily want to work with Gareth on a Star Wars film. So I met him because I was a big fan, but ended up doing it because he offered it to me and I was excited by it. I wanted to work with that director because I knew I wanted to learn from that guy and I wanted to contribute to that guy's process. We all saw what he did on Monsters, and I don't know. I mean, how do I choose? It's a good question. You know, like, again, I'm very fortunate to have been chosen by good projects.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's so much of this industry is about that human connection. And I think in some ways, when people are approaching a new collaboration, younger cinematographers, like that's a big sort of unknown. You sort of have to decide to get married with somebody after having gone on one first date with them and understand, like have an idea of what that kind of relationship would look like. But it's just an interesting process.
You can find out, you can suss them out with other partners as well. It's not like you're going in there blind after one date. You can call their friends, you can call their exes. There are things. You can read the tea leaves as well.
Yeah. Greig, pivoting a little bit, in the past, you've, I think, described yourself as a lens geek and would consider yourself to be one. And I know that you're also very particular with lighting units, especially when it comes to color rendition and skin tone accuracy, things you've talked about before. But also, I believe in the past you've described yourself as that you wouldn't consider yourself a technical DP in the way that some others are that get really into the weeds of technical processes. So how do you think for yourself, and also just as a practicing cinematographer in a broader sense, do you strike the balance between technical knowledge, focus, understanding the very specific technical abilities and limitations of tools, but also not getting too far into the weeds of that in a way that compromises the artistry and creative and emotional sides of cinematography?
I mean, I have something what I've called willful ignorance about things, and I deliberately remain ignorant about stuff that I really don't need to know about. And there's a lot of chatter about color renditions and resolution power of lenses and stuff like that, and I actually ignore them, or if I see them and take note of them, I forget them. You know, even the process involved in finishing Dune and the Batman with the film out and all that process, like the second that we had decided on a path, I kind of ignored and forgot what that path was. And I did that willfully and deliberately so. Because ultimately, if you know about too much stuff, I think that can sway your opinion. I think it can. Like, I recall the first, I can't remember, I think it was Snow White and the Huntsman. We were debating film versus digital. And I think the Alexa had just come out, the Red Epic had just come out. Like, you know, there was all these numbers floating around, 2.8K. I think the Epic was at 6K, 4K, anyway, whatever it was, I can't recall. You know, and I remember testing them going, all right, well, this must be better than that because of this and that. And like, we tried anamorphic on that. Like, there was a whole series of things that I was kind of basing my opinion about what was going to be better on. And what I suspected was going to be the case wasn't the case. So we ended up shooting film, anamorphic film, because the digital did not stand up to that, regardless of the Ks or the colors or the this or the that or the... So everything that I knew about that was wrong. And so at that point in time, I went, okay, I've just got to ignore all the noise and literally just put stuff down. And I will happily say that I don't know how to do very much stuff technologically. And I kind of remain that way. And it's a little bit, maybe it's because I'm also getting on in years a bit, like as well. Like, I'm sort of not the youngest spring chicken either. Like, and it is harder for older people like me to learn stuff.
That makes total sense.
Completely understandable. No, but I think also, by the way, I do think there is, I think, something very helpful about that philosophy. Like, cinematography can be something that people get so in the weeds of the technical that they lose focus of, like, when assessing a lens, for example, there's people who their first instinct when they're testing a lens is to throw it up on a chart or on a projector and see how it performs technically. Whereas it's like, for me at least, I don't really care about that because I just want to see what it looks like on a face, first thing. And especially, I guess, maybe among a younger generation, those conversations tend to get very heated and passionate, and people have very strong opinions about the technical abilities of this and that. And at the end of the day, I think it is good to remind people that it's okay not to be an expert on everything, and especially on things that can get in the way of the focus of our job, which is storytelling and aesthetics and visuals, right?
But we also base our opinions on outdated information. Like, there's a reason why lenses during the film days were getting sharper and sharper. There was a really good reason. And that was because, like it or hate it, I don't want to have a film versus digital debate because I don't want to start down that rabbit hole. But film had issues resolving, even 35 mil spherical. Like, so you would always need to shoot at a deeper stop so that your wide shots would be sharper. So therefore, there was a call and a need to make lenses that were sharper and resolved more. And so as films got finer grained and sharper, and lenses got sharper and more resolution, then suddenly digital kicks in. And we're still basing our opinions based on old ideas rather than what feels the best. And you're right. I think I don't read much social media commentary about what I do or anything, but I must admit I did read an interesting few comments about something about the Dune film out process. I read a debate. Like I started to do the whole
Oh God,
the rabbit hole of started to read the comments and going, oh, okay, this person said it looked great. Oh, cool. There you go, Trip. Let's start reading. Oh,
Yep. Oh, here we go.
Then the comments like, oh, you could have done that in post. Resolve does that. Like I read this whole diatribe about why waste the money on the film out? Oh, they're making a mess of it, and it's like do it in post, After Effects. Like it was actually a funny conversation, and I wish I had some avatar or some. I don't know, I wish I could have got into that conversation and said, I'm glad all the people in this conversation were in the room when I was testing that, because if that's the case, if they have a different opinion to me, I will gladly listen to them. But when people have an opinion about things that they don't know about, I find it funny. I find it just silly funny and not necessarily ha-ha funny. I just find it like, all right, well, when I'm an old man in my rocking chair and they're doing some process that I don't agree with, then maybe I'll comment on their post. But
yeah,
anyway,
we'll set you up with a anonymous Reddit account. And
some Instagram or some
a Finsta.
X account,
A Finsta.
some X account, some secret X account.
I think this is like a perfect segue into a question I had, which when Oren speaks about how to compartmentalize the technical and then the things that are more story driven, I'm really struck when I listen to conversations with you where there's just such a love for the story and for the character development. And it seems like it's just so much a part of your process. And I can't help but think that the way that you prioritize that is such a big part of why the images are so lasting and so, having so much success. And in a past interview with Lauren Scher, you said something that's been on my mind ever since, which was that you said, I never want to light a character, but I want to illuminate them. And I was curious.
No, did I say that? That's like something I'd say, Peter.
Yeah, we're talking specifically about the Bene Gesserit scene on Caladan when Paul's kind of in the mist. And yeah, it's just a beautiful statement about this difference between what it means to just shine a light on a character versus sort of having that light maybe come from the story or from the emotion. And so I was curious just to hear a little bit about sort of your philosophy, if that's something that you would actually say or what you think about it as far as how to make things really story driven and emotional driven and informing the development of the characters.
Well, there's nothing I can't stand more in movies when I'm seeing the filmmaker's hand, unless I'm being asked to see the filmmaker's hand. That's the mark of a great director, is when they suddenly start to wave their hand and go, all right, here I am, break the fourth wall, looking straight at camera thing, or there are those times in films that you start to go, okay, now I understand the filmmaker is saying, hey, listen, I'm the filmmaker, and observe. But I can't stand it when I'm being made aware of that. So therefore, if any of my lighting or framing choices create that, like we pay our $15 or whatever the cost of a ticket is nowadays to get into a cinema. We want to believe, we want to have that experience of believing in something that clearly is false. So if I can not contribute to somebody disbelieving, that's my main intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm really glad you got me saying that, because that just sounds like fantastic. I'm going to put that up on my wall.
Something I've noticed too, like sometimes when I'm shooting something, like the acting will bring out the lighting more than any of my own lighting could ever do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can light someone beautifully, but if the acting's kind of stale or not hitting, then it's losing that like special quality. But you could have lighting that's imperfect, but really strong acting, and there's something that glows about it.
Totally.
It's special.
But also it's your responsibility, I think, our responsibility to, if it's not hitting and you cannot try and understand why it's not hitting, like maybe you need to take light off their face. Yeah. Or you need to bring them into a darker section, or, like you need to change the staging such that the more that we can understand why it's not hitting. And listen, I would never consider myself a director, nor do I ever want to direct. But hopefully with enough study of fantastic directors, we can understand when a performance is fantastic. And you know that there are times like, I'm looking at like the light on you right now, Ava, where, you can say, okay, if the performance is not hitting, why don't we increase the light from the window and darken the fill on the other side? And then suddenly those little movements that you make are still evident. You still get your eye movement, but you're not getting the exposure that perhaps will give away the game, that the actor maybe isn't on their best performance. You know what I mean? Yeah. So This is why, I must say I do like operating as well. And I know that I've had the privilege to work with some of the finest operators in the world, and I always will, because I love the contribution that they make. But there are times I feel like I need to pick up the camera because I don't know how to find the image unless I'm actually adjusting it and moving it. And I don't know how to do what you're talking about unless I can move the camera and adjust it. And I think that this is where someone like Gareth, I understand fully, because his brain operates that same way.
Yeah.
Where he feels like he can best understand the performance when he's able to manipulate them in a space, as opposed to lighting the person. He lights the space and then manipulates the person. And I feel like that even though that's not always the case, that's not always possible. Like, for example, on the Batman, I wasn't going to start to move Batman around the space to get him in the right light and say, okay, be there.
Yeah.
It's like, no, Batman's here. I got to light him.
Yeah.
So that's different. But if I can handhold a camera to find a frame, or I can manipulate the actor into a place where it starts to feel right, then that's when I think it starts to really work for me. And that's where I think it helps. And it makes me look good because it looks like I've got great lighting on an actor, whereas all I've done is lit a room adequately and move the actor to the best part of the room.
Mm-hmm. And place the camera in the perfect angle that captures the perfect combination of actor to light to camera relation. And
exactly. So then suddenly everyone's talking about how good the lighting is, but actually it's not just the lighting, it's all of the mise en scène. It's the way we've manipulated everything in the frame.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if the camera were here instead of here, people would maybe say something different about the lighting, even though it's the same setup. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It makes me think about, like you were saying in Batman, from what I heard, it sounded like so much of it was pre-visualized and everything was very precise in how you captured things. How did the experience between that and like something like Dune differ in terms of like your ability to be more flexible with where you were framing and things like that? Like, I guess it's a question about kind of the shot listing process of Dune in the sense of like, when you're lighting these spaces, are you given the freedom from the team and from the director to give it that subjectivity that you're describing that kind of reveals some of those beautiful moments?
A little bit. Denis definitely boards. I'm definitely working with storyboards that he has made or we've made together, so we're definitely bored. There's no doubt. It's not like I can, if it's been staged over in that corner, that I can move it. But I could pitch for that. If I light a scene and I've been in there on the pre-light and I've got an idea of what works in the room, if I've done that pre-light and I come in on the Monday and we're blocking, I can say to Denis, I can show him pictures and say, hey, listen, I've done it as we talked about, but actually, what do you think of this? Putting the person there, they create this lovely silhouette and that can be like, and if it works for him, then we change it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, then I need to have a plan B in my brain that what I'll do is if the person needs to be in that place. There's nothing ever that cut and dry that I can think of. I'm sure there is. I'm positive there would be, but it's just a case of kind of presenting that to the director and saying, does this feel better? Is this more in the keeping of the scene? Because the script is one thing. It's words on a page. Storyboard's one thing. It's drawings on a page. When you get onto a set that's been dressed or it's been lit, like it can all change. But if you're not necessarily the robot at the end of the process, but actually a huge part of taking all of those ideas and making sure that it works at the end of the process, I don't know, but it goes back to what you're talking about, how best to express yourself to get what you want on set or in prep or whatever. Like you might have a really crazy idea of doing a scene as a one-up or in profile or in silhouette or, and if your director loves it, great. If he or she doesn't, you change.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's such a great way to put it. And building that trust with the director obviously is such an important part of that. Well, speaking about like prep and focus, we kind of wanted to pivot a little bit into a question about sort of how you mentally tackle a project. And last season on the show, we had Mandy Walker on, and she praised your ability to really like immerse yourself in a shoot. And it's something that she said that she tends to do as well when diving into, a long form narrative project. So I was just curious to hear, it's something I'm personally interested about. And I think a lot of people wonder about, but I would just be curious to hear you discuss kind of how you zone in on a project and shut out distractions, and maybe when you decided for that to be your approach, if that is your approach, and just a little bit about how you shut out distractions and how you fully just invest in a project 100%.
I don't tend to keep a lot of art or pictures in my house. You can see I don't live with a lot of art, and the art that I do have generally is not photography or image based. It's graphic, print, It's not my medium. So that's a start. And my wife's the same. She's in the visual medium and we don't have many images around the house. So that's a start. The second thing is kind of like when I'm working towards a film, I'll suck in the references. I'll have them up in my space, like if my workspace, whatever that might be, and I'll absorb them. It's like I'm consuming something. And then by the time we go to shoot, I just shut the door to the flood that's coming into the boat. And that's what I'm left with. And so hopefully I can withstand the barrage of all the water coming in from the outside, the images. And you can't get away from the images. I mean, you open your phone in the morning and you're barraged by images left, right, and center on every medium you have. So yeah, I've told this story in the past, which is quite funny. So I was doing Foxcatcher in Pittsburgh with Bennett Miller, and I don't watch films when they come out if I'm making a film, but I wanted to go and see Skyfall because there's a Bond film. So I went and saw Bond and loved it, of course, because I love Roger's work, I love Sam's work. And on Foxcatcher, the lenses were generally widest was 40 mil, generally. It was a 35 mil film, spherical lens, 40 mil was the widest. 40, 50, 75 was our main three. We come in on Monday morning and I blocking a scene in a space in a small apartment, probably like this, and I asked for a 32 and my AC went, what do you mean a 32? Because they had my set of lenses there ready for me to viewfind and they didn't have the 32 there. It was in the truck. And I went, well, I know, we need 32 in this space to get a wide shot. And he made me aware that we've never used a 32. But then, of course, you watch Skyfall, it's all 32, 40. Like it's 32, 40, 50. That's their range. Maybe 28, 27. So it changed my opinion. It changed for a brief minute on Monday morning, it changed the way the film looks. And so that it was so clear to me at that point in time that I need to not watch films when I'm making films because I get so heavily influenced by other good cinematography, Although I can watch films that would not be deemed good cinematography without disrespecting those cinematographers. Mm-hmm. They're not filmic, they're not cinematic. So I can watch handheld documentaries or I can watch cartoons, Family Guy, or I can watch
reality television. Yeah.
Yeah. Just sort of television that kind of doesn't have that cinematic kind of look. I mean, I love the cinematography in The Office. Don't get me wrong. I actually dearly love it. And I think it raised the bar in reality TV,
100%. Hi, we are excited to announce our partnership with Laowa Lenses by Venus Optics. Laowa has had a long history of providing cinematographers with unique and state-of-the-art lens options, including their recent Proteus 2x anamorphic series, which remains the most accessible T2.0 option in the market for professional production. A big thank you to SanDisk for helping support our show as well as part of their relentless reliability campaign. The extreme portable solid-state drive has become an essential on film sets and a personal favorite of mine for how durable, reliable, and fast it is. SanDisk leads in drive and memory card technology, emphasizing not just storage, but everything worth keeping. We'd also like to thank our partner at Fujifilm. We're very grateful to them for supporting not just the podcast, but a lot of what we do at the Cinematography Salon. And with the release of their latest camera, GFX 100 II, they release a tool that opens up new creative possibilities. It's brands like these that remind us why we do what we do. It's more than just support. It's about being part of a community that values every shot and every story.
Can I ask you a question about viewfinders?
Yeah.
This has been actually just a fixation of mine for maybe a month now. I know Peter and I have both talked about using Artemis because of the ability to share the image with the director. You can both look at it together and communicate exactly what you're seeing. I think I logically understand what the viewfinder is helpful for, but I think I struggle with how to communicate that with a director, what you are seeing. I almost want to create a new piece of technology with a screen that pops up so they can see what you're seeing. From your perspective, what are the benefits of the viewfinder and how do you communicate that with the director?
It's a great question because in this day and age with different formats and different ratios and all that sort of stuff, there is no good example of what a viewfinder can do. You are 100% right. The idea that if you both can be looking at the same frame at the same time, that's ideal. And I believe Artemis can do that. I think it can transmit I'm not an Artemis salesperson, by the way, but I think it can transmit your image to the director. I think you can set up a little Wi-Fi network, or I think you can be on the same network and set up a server, I think, which is interesting. I've tried and haven't been ultimately successful, but I agree. Like, it's a case of kind of offering a frame and have the director come in over your shoulder. If you've got a privacy screen, then it's a bit like, well, no, it's there. It's like, no, I'm not there. Here, move your head. And, it kind of looks a bit kind of strange doing it. And if you're in the sun, all bets are off, really. You can't see anything anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're in a brave new world right now because there is no really good way to do that.
Yeah.
I don't think.
With a traditional viewfinder, I think something that I at least fantasize about being cool about it is that, or useful, is that you can feel the lens. You can feel the depth of field.
Yes.
And then, because I often think about when I'm shooting a photograph with a 35 millimeter still camera, when you frame something up, you go, oh yeah, that's good. But like on Artemis, I find that the more telephoto I go, the less likely a director is going to respond to it because it is all flattened out and blurry and fuzzy. So I'm like, am I like selling all of these lenses short?
You're right, you are, and you are selling them short, absolutely. And that's not the fault of that program. I think that it's the fault of the technology. But I think if you were to use it purely as a framing tool, not as a lensing tool, but as a framing tool, if you can work out what the director wants in terms of the frame, in terms of the width of the frame, like, director, what is a close-up? Is it that or that? What's your terminology for a close-up?
Yeah.
And you can determine what their close-up term is or what they're feeling. Then that's when you can go, all right, based on, you can take the lead. As the cinematographer, I know that in this scene, I need to be a little bit more removed from them because we're a little bit further away, and I'll throw in a 135 because I feel like I want to be further back. And so I think that's where then you can respond on the camera. That's the only way, isn't it? You respond on the camera through the monitor.
Yeah.
And so in some ways you could argue that a program that doesn't have that can give us more authorship because we are choosing the size. Like, we're choosing the focal length and the director's choosing the framing. At that point, obviously the director will have an opinion when you put on a lens that doesn't line up with their vision.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you're deciding on both the lighting and the lensing approach for any given scene, like on any film, how much of that approach is ideological? In that, like, maybe you've had conversations with the director ahead of time to define the visual language of the film. What are the rules? What are we aiming to achieve? What is it supposed to look and feel like? And then making lighting and color and lens choices that stem from those kind of intellectual discussions of symbolism and meaning and that. Versus at this point, especially like maybe as your career has grown, you've done more films. How much of that is intuition? Oh, I just feel like we should have a slash of light in the back of this seat or something. That this is just how this feels like it should be lit. Or I just feel like it's a 40 mil here or a 50, as opposed to over analyzing or imbuing meaning or symbolism or having to back justify your decisions based on some ideological approach to a film. Is that something that you think about, and how has that evolved maybe over the films that you've done?
I think you definitely have to come up with a language. Like, you are definitely in a lens world before you start. Because let's look at the extremes of films. Look at something like Birdman, for example, that was in the late teens, early 20s in terms of its sizes. So they had to decide that well in advance. They had to know that they were in that world. And I think that film had quite a few focal lengths from like 14 up to 21 or something. So you definitely have to know you're in a world. How that changes, though, I've found, is evolutionary. As you start shooting the movie, you start finding the lens, you start finding the mood. On the Batman, I think we started shooting with the 74 mil. That was our go-to lens for the first couple of scenes. And then it just was like, we went to the 88 and suddenly, bang, there we go. That's the lens. All lenses we measured off the 88. You know what I mean? Like, that's our mid lens. And, same thing happened on Rogue. We started on a 60, went to a 72 or 75, I think. On Dune Part 2, we knew we were going to be longer. That was part of the idea, was that we were going to be longer. We knew that we were spherical. So therefore, on Part 1, the spherical was 55, 75. That were the two kind of sizes. On this, we went a bit longer. 58, 60, 85, 135.
Yeah.
We jumped up a number of sizes, not just to get closer, which we did, but also just to create that closeness. Like the characters felt like they needed to be closer mentally, and that's kind of what did it for us. So, there were times we put the 58 on, and both Denis and I just went, whoa, that doesn't feel right. But funny enough, on part 1, we used the 55 all the time, and that was perfect.
Right.
So I don't know what changed. Well, I do know what changed. We made a conscious decision to go longer. But even though the 55 would have been perfect on part 1, the 58 for us was too wide sometimes.
Yeah. And the decision to go longer was something that stemmed from a conversation, right? Like from an ideological, like this is what we want to imbue the film with in terms of a feeling for the audience.
Yep. Yeah. And we need to be closer. We need for the characters to be psychologically closer.
Right.
They're not necessarily physically closer. They just need to be psychologically closer.
Yeah. And with lighting, is it a similar thing when you're designing, for example, like the Sieches and the Fremen areas where they have these slashes of light coming in through the top? Like how much of that is based on we want this to feel a certain way as in an intellectual conversation versus I just instinctually feel like this is what this kind of space would be lit like, or, I just have this gut feeling that there has to be a slash of light there. I don't know how else to explain it, but
the Sieches are a good example of us pivoting from what the book has and also what the original concept art had. More often than not, the original concept art was always so beautifully drawn and lit that it would be criminal not to try and create something that was as good as it. In the case of the Sieches, the early concept art, there was a lot of glow globes, suspensor lights, and they felt really warm and lovely and pretty. They felt like a nice night in an apartment because we used them on part 1.
Right.
And whenever we used them, they felt nighttime and lovely and intimate. And you don't want your first meeting in a siege where people are screaming at him like he's the devil to be warm and inviting. You want it to be harsh and bright. And so it couldn't be outside because they're not going to be screaming at him outside. So we made a decision on that because both Denis and I agreed that glow globes as a mood wasn't right. So we then pivoted to daylight using the same theory that there are lights through cracks in the rocks that are hitting the bottom of this hideaway. And so specifically, that's a good point because we had the choice to either have light bounce on them, which feels a little bit nicer, or to be directly on them. And that was how we introduced them to the rest of the inhabitants of the siege, was top lit, sort of Bob Richardson bringing out the Dead style, where I almost felt like I wanted to overexpose.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to increase the exposure as the scene went on. I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't because I saw Oppenheimer and I saw the great lighting effect as the lights
come on when he's in the interrogation room. Yeah.
I never wanted to do that level. It was more about I wanted to slightly increase the level of the lights for the scene that as they come in, they're witnessing it. But I didn't do that because I didn't feel it was quite right. I still stand by that, but it was a great effect in Oppenheimer.
Yeah, it was very cool.
So fascinating to hear about. I think I'm curious, like going from some of the ideological and more emotionally driven choices for lighting, like I was curious to hear, practically speaking, as much as you're willing to talk about just some of what your lighting techniques are on a project like this. And, I've heard you talk about some techniques that I thought were super interesting that I haven't heard, like flipping through shots really quickly, just a few seconds, just to judge general contrast and kind of whether it's working. And other examples, I think on Batman, where you like to use like a gray sphere to dial in your fluorescence to LEDs and things like that. I'm just curious, like anything you might be willing to share about just very practical techniques that you've developed that help you paint this whole film from start to finish.
Well, I do believe, going back to that flicking through fast through the images, we have an amount of time that we can process an image when we're watching a movie. And it might be 4 frames, 5 frames, 6 frames. There might be a scientific measurement. I don't know. Maybe there is. But there's a point where our lizard brain, it flicks to a new image. Our lizard brain says, okay, this is a shot of a person. They're outside. There's a car. Obviously, this is slow motion on acid version of your brain. But like, okay, there's a car. There's a person in the middle. It's raining. There's a slash of light. Oh, there's a train line. Okay, so by the time you figured all that out, you're not listening to the dialogue or you're not seeing the shot. You're kind of working out what all those things are. And the more complicated that is, the longer it takes, right? I'm assuming that the more things there are to assess, the simpler you can make it. And the more you can read an image as it clicks on fast, the better, I think. So that's why I go through all my images really quickly. Even my stills, if I'm editing my stills, I just click through and I work out which ones are the ones that kind of appeal to me fastest and without any conscious brain power. And if I can read my movie or read my stills or read my film quickly, then it's a good place to start. So if I'm lighting, I'll generally like try and do what I'm doing, then glance at the image and then look down and try and just remember what I've just seen to see, okay, well, like I need to probably increase the light on the top right because I didn't read that. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's not a foolproof trick. I mean, I'm still working on it. Ask me in 20 years. But
I think
it feels like that works. It feels like it works for me. Yeah. If I can kind of see it quickly. And because if you sit down and study something for too long, you can find all the flaws in it.
Yeah.
And as a photographer, when I was learning photography, I'd put a studio shoot for like 3 or 4 days and I'd find all the flaws. But the day I had to work with a first AD who told me to kind of hurry up was the day my life changed because I had to use all my instincts quickly. And I think those first instincts are really powerful.
I find it so fascinating because I think it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's like when you get to the very end of that extremely complicated process, and in this case, maybe an extremely sophisticated lighting setup, something that's very massive, but allowing yourself that like sort of autonomy in the very last step to not be precious about it and kind of flip through things quickly and just, like you said, have that gut reaction or say, let's move talent here, let's reframe. I think that is such an important lesson and something that, you can just get so lost in the weeds of the technical, like Oren was saying earlier about compartmentalizing. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting technique.
That's why I also love having an editor edit my work, because if I had to edit my work, it would be a pile of crap. Whereas I've got an editor who doesn't give two craps about the fact that was a hard day or everyone was like in a bad mood that day or it was the hardest shoot day ever or the wind machines weren't working or no one cares. The editor doesn't care. Quite rightly, he or she should not care.
Absolutely.
They shouldn't care what happened on a shoot day.
Mm-hmm. And neither should we when we're watching the work at the end.
Nope, and we shouldn't. And we should be thankful that our editor have become really non-biased when it comes to the energy that went into a shot. All they use is their instinct on what's right for the film.
So Greig, getting into some of the specific visual choices in Dune Part 2, I was interested to hear about the flare effect that's used to sort of transition us into Paul's visions. And I was wondering both technically how that flare was achieved and then also kind of how you used it narratively, because I noticed there's certain visions where the flare is not present and others where it is. So just curious to hear a little bit about that.
We used the iron glass lenses a fair bit on Dune Part 2. And we found like some of those lenses I pulled in from the Batman. And part of the reason why I knew I could use them was because I'd used them on the chase in the Batman. But there was 1 or 2 lenses that we had that had, an oval iris, like the Helios 85mm. And so we'd use that lens with the oval iris and the way that it flared, particularly at minimum focus, was just pretty incredible. So being able to use that as a flare motivation was pretty enjoyable. There's one thing on this film that we did definitely embrace was flare. It felt like it was one of those story points that could absolutely just transition the audience into a flashback, or it could transition them into a vision or a flash forward, or it felt like it was our friend to be able to create some otherworldly feel.
Yeah. How geeky do you get about like the specificity of flares, Greig? Like when you're testing lenses, some people get very particular, like, oh, I don't like the reflective of that element and this and this. And I feel like some others are just like, that flare looks nice. That flare also looks nice. Like it's all good.
Yeah. I'm a bit more like that. I'm a bit like that. Yeah. I'm not that much of a nerd.
Yeah.
Although, there's a shot where Jessica smashes the helmet of the Harkonnen, and it's during the eclipse.
Yes.
And we have a flare of the sun at that point in time. And afterwards, I was in the dailies going, oh man, I should have got I should have cut an iris the shape of the eclipse and put it in front of the lens so that we had the bokeh of
the eclipse sun.
The eclipse sun. I was like, what an idiot. I should have been such a geek that I was like, this is going to be the right bokeh as well.
And nobody would have noticed that until now, and now everyone will notice it.
Now everyone knows my deficiencies.
I have a Dune 2 question. I'm really into Getty Prime.
Yeah, me too.
And I think in general, I just want to see like a Harkonnen spinoff of just pure Harkonnen world. But I had a question about the lighting in Getty Prime. It's the hallway confrontation between Austin Butler and Lea Sedol. What inspired that dramatic and like technically complicated lighting of that scene, and how was it executed?
Denis had some storyboards for that scene that had this idea of these anti-firework type thing, like Antilight. And it was a weird one because I don't know if that's in the book or it's a concept that he was thinking about with the Black Sun, is that kind of there's negatives to all the light, which is Antilight. Huh. And so in the boards, he kind of had him walking up this corridor by himself and, with the fireworks going off outside. And so it really became a case of trying to best make those storyboards into reality, because we only have limited space to light, of that size. It's got such scale. This is the problem with Dune, is that everything has massive scale. Like all of the set pieces have massive scale. And it's all good and well because we might be able to build them. But then if we can't light them, then we're never going to see them in their full glory. So that scene, we limited ourselves to sort of, I can't recall exactly how many legs we had, but we had enough to do a long walk. But we created a video wall with cream source vortexes and effectively a video wall, right? There were thousands, there was probably hundreds, let's say, on each side, where we had vortexes on one side and vortexes on the other. And trying to find the right flashing was really hard, because when you're communicating with a dimmer board op, it's hard to go, all right, we'll make it look like that. Bang. And they're like, okay. Like that? Oh, yeah. No, it's tough, isn't it? Because they're dealing in ones and zeros and we're dealing with something on screen, and it just can take time. So I had my assistant Tomas pull some references of some flashes from arc welders and fire in liquid and sparks, and just we played it through a video program and we looked at it on the screen to see what had the right spark effect for us or the right firework effect for us. And so by playing it through the media server, through the lights, then we could figure out what the best lighting effect would be. And then we could just take the information from that. So it was a much easier way to sort of use stuff that already existed or stuff that we shot with arc welders or flashes that we could then transition to the lights.
Super interesting.
So cool.
Greig, I wanted to ask you about your relationship with sound and music. I think in some other interview you'd mentioned the feeling of seeing the sandworm scene for the first time with the score. I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, but on this one, Hans Zimmer had already written some of the music for the film before it was even written. And obviously also there's the score from part one. How much of the music and sound are you aware of when you're filming? Like, does Denis integrate any of that into the workflow? Do you seek that out? Does that influence cadence, pacing, rhythms, images, lighting in any way? Like, what is your kind of relationship with that?
I will say this, the benefit of having done part one is that during the prep on part two, when I was reading the script or when I was doing any prep work, I was listening to the soundtrack of part one, which is an amazing soundtrack, by the way.
Yes.
So, I don't know, just go out and buy it if you haven't already. It's an amazing soundtrack.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I heard the music for part one, I was a bit like, oh, this is good. I thought, yeah, this is good. Good. I mean, it's Hans. Of course he does good stuff.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I think the third listen that I was like, this is beyond good. This is like insanely powerful. Like the track Leaving Caladan is like, if I need motivation music, I listen to that track.
Yeah.
It's like my Rocky kind of...
psych yourself up and you're, on the way to some important meeting or something.
Exactly. I listen to Leaving Caladan because it is so powerful and it's so not traditional either. The way that it's... I mean, I've sort of deep dived into how that's been written, and it's... I mean, I'm not a musician, but from a musical standpoint, it's so non-traditional. There wasn't that process on set, though. I mean, Denis gets that, and Denis should get that, of course. I don't think it would have helped me on this film. Where it has helped me, again, going back to Foxcatcher for a second, is that there's a scene where Steve Carell releases the horses. It's a Dawn scene where he releases the horses. And Bennett recommended I listen to a track. I think it was Arvo Part, with some headphones as I was filming it. And he was so right. It was like, you're listening to something and you're holding a shot of Carell and you can't physically move your body because the music won't let you, and you're listening to it and seeing it. And it was amazing to do that. That was an amazing experience. So I do believe there is the need to do that, and it's very exciting when you do get that chance. For this film, there wasn't those scenes that we needed to do that.
Yeah.
But I have done it, and I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And even just listening to the score during prep or during reading the script, I think that's something I do every time I read any script. Sometimes directors will include some music recommendations, which is always really helpful, but rare. And then other times, I don't know, maybe based on the synopsis or some visuals, like I'll think of some other film or some musician or something to listen to while I read the script. And it just, I don't know, it puts you in an emotional space, I think, when reading that can be really interesting as opposed to just the dry words on a page. So, yeah.
It really does. And I think that you can have that emotional connection to the material before you go in to shoot that material. The music's definitely resonating, and I definitely have a connection, an emotional connection. Because we can't do what we do without an emotional connection. Otherwise, we wouldn't be effective, I don't think.
No.
I think we have to have that emotional connection. Yeah.
I love so many things about your process seem to be oriented towards being present and also not boxing yourself into preconceived notions of how things should be, like being responsive, which is like such a skill to have the, I think, confidence and the composure to be there and to just be actively reflecting what you're doing and what you're seeing. I'm curious, like, do you also find yourself emotionally vulnerable when you're creating imagery or working on set? Like, is that something that you've practiced too? Is that something that's important to you?
I have not thought about that ever. I see myself a little bit like a bulletproof vest for the director and the director's process and my crew. I would not say that. It's a good question because I try and run the gamut. I don't want to be cold and just lighting and shooting right, ready to go. Like, I don't want to be one of those DPs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to be the artiste who kind of, is within their head. And it's a really fine line because I think anything I do that is negatively impacting the director's process or the actors and the director or the day by taking too long or being a little bit in my own head. By the way, of course I have those days because I'm human like everybody. But I definitely would try to kind of shield anybody from that if I can. But it is hard. I mean, it's so hard. I get off these movies exhausted, just exhausted, emotionally exhausted, for all the reasons that for me, I'm trying to keep it all in check, trying to keep my emotions in check and not pass that along to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a hard balance for me to strike because I felt like I spent so many years trying to sequester my emotions, and then I opened the floodgates, I transitioned, and then I was very present to everything, and then you're back on set, and then you're like, okay, how do I compose myself and rein some of it in, and it's like some days on set are so demanding emotionally.
100%, 100%. And like it's really, I kind of feel like we need to be personal opinion. Again, this is just my opinion, and I'm not suggesting this of anybody else. I feel like I need to be stoic. I need to be the guy on set, the peer that's being hit by the tidal waves, it's standing still. I feel like that's really important for my job, to be stoic and to be rock steady. That to me is part of my take on it. Now, I don't necessarily think that should be everyone's take, and everybody, it's like casting a film or getting musicians in a band. It's like you get the people that work for the process that works. So my process being a little bit more, I wouldn't say unemotional. I'm not unemotional, but I'm a little more, stoic's probably the right word for me. A little more kind of boom. That may not work for some directors. It may not work for some actors. If an actor is really giving it and I'm not responding at the end of a scene and hugging, like if I'm a bit more standoffish, maybe that's not what the actor needs. Maybe the actor needs from their operator or from their DP a lot more than maybe what I give. Yeah. In which case, maybe that's where we need to have a conversation if that's what an actor needs. Because I'm all about trying to give everybody what they need to deal with that. There was a scene in, again, Foxcatcher that we did where Channing is beating himself up. He just lost a match and he's beating himself up and he starts by kind of like knocking himself and he headbutts a mirror. And we knew what the scene was going to be. I knew he was going to punch himself, hadn't rehearsed it. We knew he was going to go to the lamp over there, do something, come back to the mirror, look at himself, bash his head in the mirror twice. I think he did it 3 times. I think he put his head through the wall. That was a real hotel room, right? Not a real mirror, but a real hotel room with a real bit of plasterboard. Put his head through the mirror, then put his head through the plasterboard and hit a wall. And I'm operating a camera. And of course, when you're operating a camera, you try and stay a little bit third party because you don't want to be like, oh, dude, you can't. You can't. In the middle of some guy's take, you can't just. And, he then fell down, and it was an amazing scene. It was probably one of the most powerful scenes I've ever witnessed. Never seen anybody be hit that hard, let alone by themselves, like to themselves. Like, I left that room and vomited in the hotel room across the way. Like, I was in shock. But I don't know how much I responded to Channing at that point. Maybe we need to talk to Channing because I can't recall. I might have given him a, good mate.
Yeah.
I don't know. It wasn't my place. But you know what? I needed something at that point in time. I needed a big old hug at that point in time because I feel like I'd witnessed something horrific, which I had. And the scene's incredible. It's probably one of the strongest scenes I think I've ever shot. But it's a good question because how do you make yourself available emotionally, but not too available, but enough that it helps the movie? Do you have to sort of eat a part of yourself away in order to give that to the film? I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Very cool.
Well, Greig, in closing, we wanted to ask about something that has been a topic on the show since the start, which is this idea of knowledge sharing and education. And I think in some ways, this show exists by the grace and generosity of people like you who are working at such a high level, but somehow willing to and able to set aside some time to give advice and share information. And it's just a really powerful act and something that definitely inspires us and inspires sort of the mission of the show. So sort of a 2-part question, but I wanted to just ask about your own experiences with mentorship and knowledge sharing and how that's maybe helped you along. And then the second part being how you implement that into your career and how you sort of give back and help others.
One of the things that really appealed to me when I first learned that there was a thing called a cinematographer, which wasn't till well after I graduated college. By the way, I knew there were camera people and, I knew that there was a job that people put a camera on their shoulder and that, I knew there were directors, but I didn't know that the cinematographer existed as a role. I didn't understand the process of filmmaking to understand that. When I graduated photography college, I had a lot of photography friends and we were all super close, but it wasn't until I discovered that the cinematographer's job, because we worked with other people and I'm a social being, I do love working with other people. I feel like I'm the best when I get to work and pull out other people's bests and they get my best out of me by doing the same thing. So I discovered that was a great role for me. The cinematographers that I sort of came up with and highly respected. I mean, you talked about Mandy before. I mean, Mandy was in Australia. She was one of the leading forces in Australia at that point in time. And as an image maker, she was incredible. I looked up to her on everything that she did. I mean, that film Lantana that she did, Beyond Others as well as others, Lantana was such an amazingly beautiful movie. And so, it wasn't until, I worked with her on Australia that she asked me to do second unit. And I was like, absolutely, I'll do second unit as a sign of respect, as a mark of respect, in any way to help her make the movie she wanted to. I wouldn't say I've necessarily had mentors. I don't think my life's that structured to have a mentor, but I've definitely been inspired by a lot of people who've imparted knowledge. I can name drop for a second, but I remember moving to LA and having dinner at Roger Deakins' house with Owen Roisman and Roger and Bev Wood. And I was talking to Roger about the Jesse James scene, that Jesse James scene, the train coming toward, like that one. Because, that's what you got to ask Roger about when you have a chance, right? Then talking to him about a film that I was preparing and a problem that I was having to solve, then hearing that he got stressed like I did when he read things like that in a script, made me realize that actually that we are all in the same nervous bucket. Like we all kind of walk on the set with the same level of nerve and self-doubt and all the things that we kind of experience as human beings, we all experience together, but separately. And so to learn that was a really great thing because it meant that I didn't feel so bad about the fact that I'd read a script and not know how to do it or walk on set every day and think that I was a complete jerk because I didn't deserve the job and I was falsifying my qualifications or Yeah. So it was a really good to learn that. What I would like to give back, I don't know. I think cinematography is such an important role in storytelling. And everybody asks what a cinematographer is. There's these conversations, and how far does it extend? Does it extend to animation? Does it extend to 3D gaming? Like, where does a cinematographer's job start and end? And I would like to get to the bottom of that in this new world of where our roles start and finish, because it's changing every day. And I feel like the skills that we've learnt from the film industry over the last 100 years will translate to this new media that's occurring now, that's coming through. And I'd like to help guide that. I'd like to help guide the people that want to be those people. So that's kind of what I'd like to be able to do to give back. I mean, my time at the moment is kind of limited. I am busy, which I'm very thankful of, and it's a very privileged position to be busy. So yeah, if I can give back between that's good.
That was such a beautiful anecdote, and I personally can't thank you enough, and really just wanted to thank you on behalf of the show and all of us for giving us your time today. And it's just a fantastic conversation. I can't wait for people to hear it.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. It's been fun to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Greig. This was a real pleasure.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Ava Benjamin Shore, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave and edited by Corey Abel. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for supporting our efforts with this show. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to Able Cine for their continued support. If you're unfamiliar with their offerings, Able Cine provides services such as equipment rentals, sales, maintenance, training, and much more. Additionally, they host complimentary events at their various locations. For more details, please visit ablecine.com. If you enjoyed listening to the show, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.